In this video, we're going to talk about 3 reasons why you're having trouble finding more volunteers for your worship team. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com, your daily dose of practical worship leading tips. If you want to find those tips, head over to Instagram or Facebook at Leading Worship Well, where I'm posting new worship leading tips every single day. But you're here on YouTube, so go ahead, hit the subscribe button down below, and let's get into it, because today we're talking about finding more volunteers for your worship team, and more specifically, why you're having trouble finding worship team volunteers for your worship team. If you're a worship leader, chances are you probably wish you had some more people on your team. Maybe you'd like some redundancy in your positions. You'd like to have more than one guitar player, or maybe more than just you leading worship so that you could take a week off every once in a while. That would be nice, right? But you might have also noticed that it's really hard to find more team members for your worship team. People aren't coming up to you every single Sunday asking to join your team. So why is that happening? Or why does it seem like there is seemingly no one in your church who can join your worship team or wants to join your worship team? I'm going to share with you 3 reasons today. Before we hop into those, I want you to pause this video for a second, head down to the comments, and answer this question. What is your number 1 tip for finding more worship team volunteers? What has personally worked for you? Share with the rest of the Leading Worship Well community so we can all learn from each other. So pause this video, scroll down, hit the like button while you're down there, and then leave a comment letting us know what your best tip is for finding more worship team volunteers. Thanks so much for sharing your knowledge. Now let's get into why you might be having a little bit of trouble finding worship team volunteers. The first reason is this: it's that you don't respect your current worship team volunteers. Yikes, right? Kind of hurts, but I want you to take a sincere look at the state of your worship team and ask yourself this question. If you weren't already a part of your worship team, and you saw your worship team from the outside looking in, would it be a team that you want to join? Would you be like, man, those people have it going on. I want to join that worship team. They're doing amazing things, and I want to be a part of it. Or is it like, they seem like they aren't really into it. They seem like they're not prepared. Maybe the leader's not getting them the things that they need to prepare properly on time. Like, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to be a part of that. So I want you to honestly ask yourself that question. And no worship team is perfect, but just ask yourself, like, before you try to get more people to join your worship team, is your worship team a team worth joining? Are you leading your worship team well enough that other people would be interested in that? And I just gave one example in the official reason you don't respect your current volunteers' time, but there's a bunch of examples like that. But number 1 is, are you respecting your current volunteers' time? Or are you wasting their time? Like, when they come to practice, are you showing up late? Are a bunch of other people showing up late and you're waiting for them to start, so the people who do actually get there on time have to wait like 15 minutes for a rehearsal to start? Or are you respecting the people's time who shows up on time? And you have a plan for your worship rehearsal, and you're like, okay, our worship rehearsals start at 6:30, and we're going to be done by 8, or whenever your ending time is, and you stick to that because you want to respect your volunteers' times. That's one of the, I've talked about this before, that's one of the currencies that they work in. If they're volunteers, they don't get paid money, but you can respect their time because they're spending, literally, their time serving on your team. So we want to be respectful of the investment that they put in, and it's all about culture. If you build up the culture of your team to a point where it's an attractive culture that people want to join, then I think that people will start to actually want to join your team. So that's reason number 1. Number 2, let's say you have an amazing team. Things are awesome. Things are going great. Your team loves you. You're doing amazing things together, but still nobody is joining your worship team. I want you to consider this. Reason number 2 that people might not be joining your worship team is because you haven't asked anybody. You never put the invitation out there. Like, imagine if you had a birthday party and you planned it, and it was going to be the most amazing birthday party in the world, but you never invited anybody nobody would come, right? So invite people to your worship team. And how do you do that? And I want to challenge you to think a little bit deeper here, because for you might be hearing that and be like, yeah, on Sunday I need to put up an announcement slide that says worship team auditions happening whenever. And that's a great place to start. That's like a general announcement, but I want to challenge you to not just ask generally, but to ask personally. If you are serious about finding worship team members, finding people to serve on your worship team, then you need to be learning about the people in your church. I bet there's somebody in your church who plays an instrument or who has the ability to play an instrument if they put in a little work. And all you have to do is go build relationships with people and find out how they can get involved in the church just in general. Like, don't go into it thinking, man, I'm only going to talk to people who have musical ability, but your goal as a leader in the church should try to be plugging people into serving in the church, because we want to equip the saints for works of ministry. So you got to identify the gifts and then get them plugged into serving in the church. But as you do that process, you're going to learn about some people who have musical ability. Maybe they can sing, maybe they can play guitar, or they play drums, or whatever. You're going to find these people as you build relationships with them. But chances are, if you're like this distant worship leader who never talks to anybody, people aren't just going to come up to you and be like, hey, I'm pretty good at guitar, and I've been playing alone in my bedroom for the past 10 years, and I'm actually really good, but I'd like to play with the worship team. People aren't going to have that conversation, and if they do, you should probably run in the opposite direction, because that's kind of weird, and we're looking for a little bit of humility in our worship team members. So usually I've found that the people who come up to you and are like adamant about joining the worship team because they're really amazing, those aren't the people that you want on your worship team. So if you want to find good worship team volunteers, you got to go find them. Literally find them. Talk to people, learn about their skills, learn about what they're passionate about, just for the benefit of your church, and then you'll find people who are musicians who can serve on the worship team. If you haven't been able to find worship team volunteers, maybe you haven't been asking people to join your worship team. The third and final reason that you might not be able to find worship team volunteers in your church is because people perceive your worship team or your worship band as a closed group. And this might be your fault, or it might not be your fault. It might be your fault because maybe you have been spending too much time with your worship team and you're seen as this clique in your church who doesn't really interact with the rest of your church. You're just this group of friends that seems impenetrable. Yes, that's the word. And people are like, they're a group. I can't get in with them. So if you want to dispel that idea, then actually go make relationships with people in your church. Like I talked about in the last point, you got to get to know people in your church, find out their skills and abilities. If you do that, and not just you, but you can apply this to your entire worship team members, as your worship team members go out and build connections in the church, people are going to realize that your worship team isn't this closed group. So that's one way that people might perceive your team as a closed group. The other way is like they just look up on stage on Sunday mornings and say, okay, they got their bases covered. Like they have a bass player, they have someone to sing, and a guitar player, and it's good. It sounds good. I think they're fine without me. Some people are thinking that way. So how do you overcome that? Well, like we talked about in the last step, you actually go ask people to join your team, or you put a slide up like we talked about. I think the personal ask works better, but if you want people to know that your worship team is open and available for everyone to join, then yeah, make an announcement or two, and that'll put the idea out there. But really, it's more about your actions. Are you out and interacting with the people of your church? That's going to show that your worship team isn't a closed group. Everyone's welcome to join, and then you can start those conversations with people and actually ask them if they want to join your worship team. We talked a lot about worship team leadership in this video, and I think one of the best ways to actually lead your worship team is to pour into them. not just treat them as band members, but to actually understand that they are people that you want to develop and let them know that their job is important. And the best way to do that is through worship team devotions. So it's setting aside 15 minutes to actually sit down with your team and pour into them, and not just focus on music, but focus on the fundamentals of worship leading, about the responsibility that they have to lead your church. And so what I've done is I wrote a devotional for worship teams. It's called We Are All Worship Leaders, and it's all about raising people's understanding of their responsibility when they are part of a worship team. So it's raising them up from, man, I'm just in the background and what I do doesn't really matter, to leading your team in the understanding that we are all worship leaders, and that means a bunch of different things. So that comes out this Monday as of this video, March 30th. But if you sign up for the launch list right now, you can get a devotion completely free that you can lead your worship team in and start having some of these conversations about the importance of their role as worship team members. So link to that in the description below. If you want to lead your worship team well, go get that and start leading your team in this understanding that what they do is really, really important. Thanks so much for joining me today. My name is Spencer Cormany from leadingworshipwell.com. Until I see you in the next one, keep leading worship well.